multi-sensory.
Not always easy.
Yes.
But if I could say, I'm gonna give you control and you can do the, like you can, they love that, so.
We good? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm just gonna do this.
Actually, is this mic on? Is this mic on? Okay. I just want to reintroduce our speaker. We apologize for the technical difficulty. So our speaker today is Donna Guzman. She's a supervisor for student services, and she's speaking about the multi-tiered systems of support. And so she's going to go back and recap the slides that you've probably already seen but not heard.
Thank you. So just to recap, multi-tiered systems of support, and sometimes we'll hear it called VTSS, Virginia Tiered Systems of Support, and that's basically just our state's version. But what that is just a data-driven decision-making framework for establishing academic, behavioral, and mental health supports that are needed for students to be successful in school. And this is accomplished using tiered systems. So okay, multi-tiered systems of support is a data-driven decision-making framework for establishing the academic, behavioral, and mental health supports needed for students to be successful in school. And it's accomplished using a three-tiered system. Our 80 to 90% of our students generally receiving just that universal instruction do quite well. Then you have about 5 to 10% of students that would need more targeted intervention, and about 1 to 5% of our students might still be struggling and just need a little bit more intensive intervention. And we're going to get deeper into this as we go along. The components of MTSS are universal screeners, data-driven decision-making, evidence-based interventions, progress monitoring, and collaboration and teamwork. And again, all of these are just best practices that teachers have been using for years and years and years, but it's just been put into this framework for us to be able to see and use. So we're gonna go through each one. I had already touched on the academic. So at Tier 1, all students are gonna receive high quality curriculum and instruction in the general education classroom. That's our ELLs, our special education students, GT students, everybody is receiving that. You can see examples here of those Tier 1 instruction. Everybody gets the standards of learning, students are placed in reading groups, math workshop is used, use of manipulatives. We reteach for any student that is struggling or maybe not getting that concept right away, or maybe you didn't do well on a test, you might get some reteaching and then you might be able to take the assessment again. Other best practices are cooperative learning, project-based learning. Teachers normally just differentiate their instruction. That might be how they're delivering their instruction. That could be using visuals. That could be make sure it's verbal. That means giving students the opportunity to speak to each other. You can differentiate how students are able to show you their learning. Some students do well on tests, others do better through projects. And so this is just the way that we normally do our practice. And that progress monitoring that's mentioned here, that was mentioned in the other slide, is just making sure that we're keeping track of how students are doing. If they're not doing well, then we need to intervene. We need to provide interventions in different ways to help them learn. You wouldn't keep teaching them something the same way. You'd have to alter the way you're teaching in order to meet their needs. Same thing if a student was excelling and they're getting things very quickly. That's when we're looking at maybe some of our GT students or twice exceptional. Then we're gonna give them some things above and beyond so that they are continuing to excel and succeed. Next, we're gonna move on to behavior. So behavior at Tier 1, all students are explicitly taught positive behavioral expectations. And teachers use a consistent approach to discipline. So those basic rules, most schools have what we would call a matrix, and they would have maybe 3 to 5 things that they would teach the students, like let's say respect, responsibility, and pride in themselves. And so they would go through and they would describe and explain and teach what those look like, and all students would learn that for their school. And so PBIS is positive behavioral intervention supports. So those tier 1 practices on this side are that PBIS, giving students leadership opportunities, and sometimes students who might be struggling with behaviors, if we give them maybe opportunities to lead, those are things that they excel with, and we see a return in the behavior. Along with PBIS, we do rewards and incentives. Kids are much like adults. If you know that paycheck at the end of the week or the end of the month is definitely an incentive for you to do your job. And then you know if you are doing a good job and you're getting your paycheck that you're going to be able to get things that you want. Well, all students work the same way. And so being able to provide rewards and incentives are a way that all students might be supported in making good choices and having positive behavior. That reteaching, you'll see that on every slide, is very important. We don't expect students just to know our expectations. We have to teach, and we may have to reteach. It may take several times for them to really build that understanding. We teach self-calming strategies to students, which work well for adults too, and again with the progress monitoring. So these are things that all students receive. If students are still struggling at tier 1 with these basic examples, then we would move to something with tier 2. And again, that's when we're using small groups to meet students' needs. Sometimes that small group might be with a counselor, and we would get into that in another slide. Sometimes we would pull small groups, maybe just to work on what respect looks like or what responsibility looks like, and just work with them a little bit more intensively. Some other things that we do at a tier 2 level is something called check-in, check-out. And that's when we're just identifying, on that matrix, maybe the different areas that the student needs to work on, or is having trouble meeting those positive behaviors. And then we find those incentives or rewards to help guide them, entice them to do well. And then at tier 3, this is when we would get a little bit more intensive, and we would have more frequent interventions and progress monitoring. So you'll see, it's just that basic level, then a small group, then at tier 3, each time you're looking at something that's just more intensive, more often as we go along. And then we'll move on to mental health. And so in our mental health portion of MTSS, all students receive these classroom instructions and school-wide programming and initiatives. So for example, counselors at the elementary level, they will go into each classroom and they will teach counseling lessons to all the students. And so all students are getting that. PBIS does kind of cross over into the mental health too. In elementary also, they have zones of regulation. And so it's just thinking about how you're feeling and how you might be reacting in different ways, strategies to react more positively. 10th grade, we do teen mental health first aid, and all our 10th graders go through that. You could have something like a Red Ribbon Week or a bullying intervention program or a week where you're focusing on either trying to prevent those behaviors or focus on rather the positive behaviors in there. And so again, at tier 2, if we have students that are struggling with their mental health, they may receive small group counseling. Sometimes there's a group of kids that could be struggling with anxiety. And so a counselor may meet with that small group of kids. And that would be in collaboration with parents and other school personnel who are requesting that. And then at tier 3, a counselor may meet one-on-one with the student to provide them the support that they need. And they would also maybe give consultation or referrals to outside services that the student might benefit from. And again, that's in conjunction with their families. And along with MTS is RTI, and it's kind of like the catch-all for all of this. So there's a process that we use called RTI, which is response to intervention. So again, all students start off by receiving that high-quality tier 1 instruction and interventions, and we're constantly progress monitoring them. And again, 80 to 90% of the kids, they're gonna do great at this level. But then we have that 5 to 10% of students who may not be making that progress that we had hoped, or trying those differentiation strategies as a teacher, or putting interventions in place in our classroom, and they're just not making the progress we had hoped, and we can feel kind of stuck. So we can bring the student to this RTI team. That team can consist of administrators, counselors, teachers, coaches, that could come together and figure out some other tier 2 interventions that the kid or the student might be able to benefit from. And we would try those interventions for about 4 to 6 weeks, using our progress monitoring to see if the student would make progress. If the student makes progress, they go back to tier 1 and everything's a-okay. Let's say we try that 4 to 6 weeks and it doesn't work. We might try something else next time, and we could do that for 4 to 6 weeks. But if they're really struggling at tier 2, we could move to tier 3, and we would just, again, maybe the intervention would be slightly different. We would also maybe just increase the time that we're spending and the frequency that we're spending with those students to hopefully get them where we need them to be. So that whole process could take about 8 weeks to go through, depending how the student is progressing. If a student did not make progress and we were still stuck, they may be, and I'll say again, may be referred to child study. So if that team is meeting and things are not improving, and you're talking with the parents, of course, and things are not improving, that student could be referred to child study to see what else might be done. And the great thing about RTI is you don't just automatically say, oh, we're going to check with special ed. No, there are a lot of things that we can do as teachers and specialists to help students improve their success. And so we'll try all these things. The awesome thing is now you have all this data from RTI. You have intervention you've tried, you have the data collected, and that can help to inform that child study meeting to kind of figure out what's going to happen next. Now, of course, there's all of special ed's own testing that I won't get into, but it's a starting point. It's a great starting point. And just to kind of wrap up, how does MTS and special education work together? Well, again, it's like beating a dead horse, but every single student will get high quality tier 1 instruction in the classroom. We all get that. So that is MTSS. That's best practices. If a student is getting help through RTI, it doesn't mean that a family would have to wait to request a special education evaluation, but we wouldn't say, oh, okay, well, you're going to get tested for special education, so we're just going to let you sit there. No, we would never do that, right? So RTI can still continue to support the student and address the student's needs, maybe while they're going through that evaluation process, because that can take some time. And then as a part of the evaluation, schools can gather information, again, like I said, from the RTI process, like screening and progress monitoring data, which could inform a child's study. If a student has an IEP for something like, let's say, a learning disability, but begins to have some behavior issues, a school can address those through RTI and tier 2 supports. Now, I would say that you would want their case manager and maybe the special education teachers maybe a part of that RTI meeting. You may call them in and work together, because again, this MTSS, it's a collaboration between all of us. But it can be addressed through RTI. And then questions.
Hi.
Hi.
So one question that I have is, how is FCPS monitoring progress towards MTSS plans for students individually?
How are we monitoring it?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a whole MTSS process and an RTI process, and so when a student comes into the RTI meeting or team, we go through and we collect, basically. We go see, like, what are their SOL scores, what are all their things, and so we have it kind of like in a one-stop shop. And then we have lists of different interventions that we can use for students, research-based best practice interventions, and then those are recorded by the teacher or whomever is giving the intervention, and then they're just used again.
Are they stored in a specific system? Do parents have access to MTSS plans?
They don't have access, but if your child goes into RTI, you do have access, because a part of the process is we invite the parent in, because we want to get as much information from you as you have, and we want to give you as much information, because it's going to be a team effort. And so, like, we would talk about the interventions as a team, and you would be a part of that. And then we would try it for the 4 to 6 weeks, and then we would invite you back in, and we would do it again. We would review that data. So you would have access to it, but, like, in time, access to where they're documenting it, probably not.
Thanks.
Yeah.
As far as, I just want to understand, like, with the child study referrals, if you have a student who, with a suspected disability, do you always go through that RTI process if the parent hasn't requested evaluation? Does it depend on what the disability is? How does that?
You can remember, you can do these simultaneously.
I understand, but I mean, as far as the school referring, like, if a teacher says, I believe this kid has whatever disability. Does it depend on the disability whether they would do them simultaneously, or does the school generally just do RTI?
A teacher might suspect something, but you've got to look at that through the lens of, okay, what exactly is the teacher seeing? They don't suspect a learning disability or emotional disability. They say, here's what I see.
Right.
And that usually would go through an RTI team. There are circumstances where a student comes in and clearly there's a physical or mental disability that's obvious, and then that would obviously go straight to a
Then you
child
don't go
study.
through this process, you just go straight to
The RTI process, I think we talked about this a little bit the last time. If you're sending a child to the child study and we don't have the data yet, the child study team is likely going to send that through the RTI team for that data process to start, so that we can come to that conclusion that we do suspect a disability. Suspected disability is kind of a misnomer. There has to be some evidence to support that, because the student is not turning in homework every day. I don't suspect a disability yet. There's some other things that we have to figure out.
But if a parent came to you with a new student and had a laundry list of issues at home, then you might go ahead and do the child study in conjunction with
It would be
RTI.
situational. We often have students that go straight to child study, and we go ahead and move toward evaluation. Remember, it takes 65 business days, so the RTI process is very important because it's going to inform that team when they get eligible.
What is the special ed staff's role? Are they always involved at the beginning of the RTI process? Like, in an RTI team, who's on the team?
It would just depend, like per school, per student. So again, it's situational. If I had a student that was coming maybe for behavioral issues, like that's the concern, then I would be inviting like the social worker, the counselor. I might look for one of our psychologists to come in, the teacher. I may or may not invite a special education teacher in, but it's not to say that they wouldn't be a part of the team. Schools kind of design that, and it would be situational.
Okay, at what point would you get involved, or do you personally get involved in some of these?
Me?
Yeah.
Only if they, if I'm asked to come in, or if I ask for consultation purposes, I might. I know we have behavioral interventionists in the elementary school, and they have been involved in the RTIs when we're looking at behavior, which has been a blessing, I think.
Okay. And one other question. Oh, one question just at the end, you were saying, if a student has an IEP for something, and then something else arises, my understanding is that the IEP team also can address that directly, regardless. So I just want to make sure that I understand correctly. Would an IEP meeting be called at that point? Would it always go through the RTI process? How does that work? It's just situational. It's
I'm just
everything.
going to go back. It's situational. It's going to depend on
Okay.
each individual, and I'll use some common ones. Students aren't coming to school, truants, and they have an IEP. We may very well call an IEP meeting to talk about, okay, is there an anxiety issue? Parents say they're afraid of coming to school. So then that would kick in an IEP team.
Okay.
Otherwise, parents say, well, I have a hard time getting them up, and there's like some basic issues in the home that need to be helped with, and we need to have a process. That really would be a RTI process. So
Okay.
it really is situational, and that's why you've got these two teams, and they're very collaborative, and they're working to kind of identify, you have an issue, where is the issue coming from? And that's really what the RTI team can help as well.
Okay, that's very helpful. And then just one other question, because I know you said everybody gets tier 1, but obviously students in program classrooms who aren't on SOLs, do we consider that tier 1? What pieces of tier 1 do they get? It's situational.
Yeah,
so.
and well, and all students would usually start off like the lesson, like the teacher's in the front, and maybe she might start off a
I'm
lesson.
talking about students.
in like programs.
Yep.
Yes.
There's
There you go.
Those are specialized programs. They have their own.
But I just want to, when we say every student always gets tier 1, that does not,
That does not.
that's every
include-
student who's on the SOL
Correct.
track.
I mean, there are some
in those
students who,
classes.
they're having a very involved IEP team, and if they're having issues, it's gonna be
We're assuming it's all
addressed.
disability related in some
Right,
way.
it's gonna be addressed specifically within that classroom, in that support
Okay.
that we provide there.
Do they get to be part of, like I know at my kids' elementary school, it's the the ROAR program or the school, I guess that's what I'm trying to get at is if there's a school-wide incentive kind of program, how are we working to include those students who may not be getting that, specifically that instruction?
I would be willing to bet that most schools involve them in some level of those team reward systems, if
Okay.
that's what you're
I
asking.
mean, I can speak personally.
Yeah.
My son goes to Auburn, and I know that program is included in like their houses. And so
I was gonna
those
say, I
kids
could
are.
mention that too.
I'm no expert on the house system, but I know that they have it there, and so I know that they do it. And
I have
know
no
that
doubt Auburn does.
Yeah, we do.
I know that my son is a part of one of the houses, and so they earn points and things like that related to the PBS system.
And we have the visuals available within the classroom. Students are all sorted in different houses. And it will be modified a little bit. May not be appropriate for them to come to a whole school pep rally, right? Because of a variety of different reasons. But they are all sorted into a house. They will all, to the best that we can, include them when we have our house meetings. And it's definitely something that we strive for. I know when I was at Brumfield, we did as well. I can't speak to any of the other schools. But
And I guess that's,
so.
from everything I've seen, you all are a model, and I want to just, sometimes we're not super consistent across schools for things like that, so I think that's something worth looking at or at least raising as part of the conversation, because I think there are some pretty neat programs out there.
So I think it's part of our continual approach to being inclusive in all schools. And I think, as you probably tell from the last couple of years, we've made some great strides with that.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's going to be a continual process. And I think all schools make an effort to do it. I think some schools just probably execute it a little better than others. However, I don't think that we have any schools that are purposely excluding those kids. I think that other schools just have done a really nice job of finding ways to make sure that they're included, for example, by differentiating the reward, right?
And remember, we group a lot of our programs are grouped in certain schools. It's for convenience of the services that we provide. So those schools excel at it. I mean, I look at Ritchie, I look at Liberty High School, I look at Auburn, Brumfield is now one of those schools. If you go in those children are included across the curriculum, across the spectrum when it comes to how students interact with each other, because it's important to have access to the general education peers as well.
Well, I think this has been really helpful to kind of understand how that fits together. So, does anybody else have any questions? Kind of, you live this every day.
I know, but thank you. And for
Thank
starting
you very
over.
much. I appreciate it. So yeah, if we could get your slides, we'll go ahead. I'll send those out with the minutes. I think we post those as well. Thank you. Reports. I spent the end of last week at the State Special Education Advisory Committee meeting, so I thought I would share about the fun and games that are going on in Richmond. Unfortunately, the State Special Education Advisory Committee meeting coincided exactly with the OSEP visit to the Office of Special Education. So we didn't have all the cast of characters that we would normally have had from DOE at that meeting. So I expect our December meeting will be very busy trying to catch up from some of that. Our first presenter was with the State Council of Higher Education, and she also works with the accreditation agency, so I'm not exactly sure where she resides, but she was talking about transition planning and about statewide, and I know in these areas Fauquier does a lot better than a lot of the school divisions, but still the percent of students that with disabilities who are in college or in training programs, certification programs within a year of college is way, way, way below other students, and that's for all disabilities. One number that really struck me was only 37% of students with disabilities are disclosing those to colleges, which is very concerning to me, having a couple of students myself, where I feel like the supports obviously they don't have the same kind of special education supports they'd have under IDEA, but they do have 504 accommodations or available to them. So the fact that something is causing students to feel like it's better for them, if 60% better for them not to disclose their disabilities, that may be something that we can look at. Also, really interesting because she spent a lot of time, the speaker spent a lot of time talking about the role of parents and how important parents are in the process of getting their kids into college, especially kids with disabilities. But one of the big barriers that I've seen and heard parents talk about is that once the kid gets into college, there's absolutely no ability for the parents to have conversations with the college about what's going on with their students. And so I think looking at maybe figuring out how students can be independent but designate who their circle of support will be, and then being able to involve those people at the college level. And that was a conversation that SEAC had. And then also she emphasized the importance of parents, and we're on top of this, importance of parents understanding diploma types, and that they're seeing graduates and around the state some pretty unfortunate situations of kids graduating where they didn't really realize what they were doing until it was way too late. And also that a lot of kids who are going to college who have IEPs or had IEPs are getting there and then having to spend almost their entire first year on remedial courses because the maths they took just weren't strong enough. And so she was talking about possibly school divisions looking at doing summer interventions or other things for graduating seniors so that they're not finding themselves very discouraged and spending a fortune on classes that won't count toward their diplomas, because she said that they're seeing that they're losing a lot of first and second year college students just because they feel like they're not getting anywhere and they're paying a lot of money for an education that parents feel like they should have gotten in high school. So that was another piece of that. Then we got to hear from the guy who oversees Virginia IEP, which was interesting too. And it's used by 116 LEAs, including Fauquier. It's now in the colleges and universities, and they're using it to train. I mean, it's not like being used for students there. It's being used for education students, special education teachers. So hopefully teachers will land in jobs already knowing how to use the system, which is positive. There's now a new dashboard. I don't know if it sounded like it was rolling out as he was talking, kind of, with more compliance information so that you can access more information about just deadlines and things like that, and also about caseloads. And then there was the question to VDOE, what information are you using on compliance from this? And we didn't really get a complete answer, but I think that's something obviously that school divisions want to be aware of. The things that SEAC members were very concerned about was the parent interface. We've talked about that, just the ability for parents to access their kids' IEPs. The fact that other members of the IEP team can all just log in at school and parents have to do the push out email and go through the process that they have to. The interesting conversation was that he basically said all that is an add-on by the company. It's not VDOE, and generally the response from the SEAC pretty much across the board was, this is your system. If you let them have add-ons and you let them use student data, you'd better take some responsibility for how it's working, especially when it comes to parents and compliance. So he kind of looked at like a deer in the headlight a little bit and said that he'd be talking to the company and getting back to us. So I expect that we'll have another report on that at our next meeting. Also, there was a big concern, I don't know if this is a concern for us, but on partial consent, figuring out how to do that. I'm guessing that we've just figured out, we've printed out and which is what the answer is. But there are school divisions that are telling parents that if they don't fully consent, they're going to delete the rest of their IEP. There's just some really not awesome stuff going on. I was confident that that was a time for me to go get some water because I knew that we were probably not in that boat. But there's some pretty unfortunate things going on in some other school divisions. And then just in general, looking at parent involvement and oversight of those add-on features. And then the VDOE update, like I said, Samantha Hollins wasn't there because she was home with OSEP at the office. the state SEAC has requested more transparency on due process filings, since we have very few actual due process outcomes, that we're supposed to be looking at trends in what parents care about in due process, and, you know, since there are a very, very small number of actual determinations, that's really the only way we can get at that. So they're trying to figure out how to do that. I think we're gonna end up with probably like short summaries, like a few sentence summaries of each of the filings, so that we can take a look at that. Charging for student records is an issue. We don't charge for student records, do we?
Special education records?
Yes, okay.
You get
Yeah.
You get to review your student's file at any time that you wish. If you wish a copy of it, we will provide a full copy.
Okay, fantastic. We don't charge people $400 to access their kids' special education records.
Yeah.
Great, that's good. Also another one where I was like, yay, fuck here. The SEAC is planning to add a military liaison. This was reported to the State Board of Education. They think that's a great idea. And then everybody figured out this is probably a legislative change, so now they're figuring out how to make that happen. And as you all know, the governor is focused on attendance literacy, and this all in tutoring. So we were just talking about that, Right Help right now. The OSEP investigation seems to be, at least their time there seems to be wrapping up, so we should have some information by December. And then we spend a lot of time on orientation for new members of the SEAC, and we're meeting again in December, the 6th through the 8th. So the only other thing I have for my report is that I'm working on putting together an I'm Determined presentation for November. Since we don't have a meeting in December, I think time-wise, we probably need to do it then. And it sounds like Auburn is sending a whole bunch of folks in November to an I'm Determined presentation for teachers, so we'll probably have a report on that as well. So I think that's everything. Any questions about any of that? All right. Mr. Corbett.
I just have a couple of things. We've got to work around, I wish I could blame Virginia IEP for our inability to access it, but it's our switch over to our new systems to get away from the ransomware attack that we had. That's cleared up, but we're now having to go along behind and fix all the interfaces, and that's all this is an interface. It was difficult when we originally went with Virginia IEP. It took several weeks to get it all squared away, so I suspect it's going to take a few weeks. We've got paper copies out to everybody. We've got a process to get it all loaded back up into Virginia IEP once we get there. Parents should not be surprised if the case manager says, can you send me a copy of your child's IEP from parent portal? Because parents can still access the program.
I tried to pull IEPs yesterday and could not
Did you?
I couldn't get to anything that's this year. I can get to old stuff.
If you go down to the bottom, there's a box down there, somewhere in there should be said to change the calendar on it. It says view all. It'll go back and load up all of the previous. That was a switch that they did.
No, I can see the document,
Mhm.
but then when I click on it, I get an error message.
Okay. Well,
For this year's.
For this year's. Okay. So we're
It's
still,
just
you know,
in.
so I hope to have this done within, I've been told in the middle of next week. I'm hoping before the end of the month. So is my goal. So I apologize for that, but you know,
Keep us posted.
we're plowing ahead.
Yeah, it
So-
was everything on the page, because it's like 6 pages of dates, and everything on the most current page was, I got an error message when I turned it.
We'll look into that to see if we can, because we have a couple of people who are practice dummies.
So just to be clear, you're gonna have to re-enter all the IEPs into the system?
No, what we'll be able to do is the paper IEPs, we'll be able to PDF them and upload them and create what's called an event. And
But we
just-
can't get to the backup of the system from the
You-
vendor?
Everything that's in there is secure. If it's already in Virginia IP, it's secure. It has nothing to do with.
Oh, so this is just for the new ones that are being
This is just
developed?
for the
Okay.
new stuff. Everything is in there.
Got it.
It's not.
So we're asking parents just for this temporary time when we don't have,
Correct.
okay.
We may ask them to send us a copy of it because we can't access.
I understand.
The program, so we can't access the KU file reviews and things like that. So we're moving along.
Okay.
And going back to your transition, We've recognized transition as an issue for quite some time. Our new transition specialist, Dean Spar, he's taking on an additional task, and we're going to take transition down into the elementary school and start that process much earlier so that we can, it'll be a much simplistic process, but it'll start the process for the student and, more importantly, the parent to be talking about transition. And we often run into that when we ask parents, where do you see your child in 10 years? Their eyes glaze over. I had no idea. I hadn't thought about that. So it's kind of to start that process. Any questions? Great, thank you.
Thank you. And then I have the PRC September summary. Dr. Selecta is not here tonight. She has done school visits to see Hunter Ritchie and H.M. Pearson. The back to school night at Ritchie, she spoke with 38 parents, and at Pearson, 16. She went to the Connect for Success PRC symposium. Was that in Harrisonburg? She said she learned a great deal about how to support families with IEPs and 504s, and how those are similar and different. Met with other counties just to figure out how for Fauquier fits and how to better serve our students. She said the hot topic throughout Virginia was resources for autism and ID families that have students with those disabilities. In September, the PRC workshop was on diploma options. I think she had just had that at our last meeting and wasn't quite ready to report on it. There were 36 attendees, and they really wanted an applied studies focus, so they're planning to address that again at the fair, the disability fair in the spring, which has been confirmed that is actually going to be at Fauquier High School. I think we originally thought it might be at Kettle Run, but that's going to be at Fauquier on March 9th. Is March 9th, is that a weekend? Are we doing it on a Saturday now?
Yes.
Which is great. No, it's been in the evening. This last time it was it was after school.
We wanted to move it back to the weekend.
I think
It was
that's-
didn't it used to be in the
Yes,
Yes.
it used to be in the weekend. I think that's a good thing. She's going to be visiting school fall festivals, and the October workshop is being, Pete C's the presenter, and the topic is understanding special education. That's October 11th. For members of this committee, I think it is helpful to have somebody from the SEAC attending those, so that we get a sense firsthand of what parents are concerned about, in case there are things that we can address. And then the invitations for the transition fair are going out in October. So please thank her. She's on the road. A lot of these are not happening during the working hours, so I know she's really putting in a lot of effort, and we appreciate it. All right. Old business, SEAC membership and representation. I'm curious, and I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, but what, magisterial districts or what areas do you each have connections to? Either you have kids in school there, or you teach there, or you live there. I'm just trying to figure out what areas we don't have covered as a SEAC.
Well, I am
Cedar Run?
Cedar Run.
And Scott is Auburn. And I'm exactly the
Kettle Run.
same.
Kettle Run is late.
Yes, that's,
Kettle Run is,
is Lee.
oh, really? Okay. Then I must be on the corner of Cedar Run, because I'm right up the road. Okay. Okay.
I actually can't tell you what my district
But
is,
you're in Marshall.
but I'm in Marshall.
I don't recall exactly how the districts break down, but I know
Bless you.
I have parents of my students at Bradley Elementary who would definitely be interested if I reached out and told them about it. One of them spoke during public comment last year.
Okay. Let me get, I'll bring,
Bradley's Center.
I'm sorry?
Pretty sure Bradley's Center.
Okay.
And those kids could be coming from
Anywhere.
other places too. So what are we missing?
We have Scott.
We have Scott, I mean, it seems like we have,
You got Marshall, you got
Marshall.
Center, you got Scott, Cedar Lee, and,
What's
Lee-
like South County?
Lee District.
Lee?
yeah, Lee's not Kettle Run, is it?
Yeah, they changed it.
Really?
Yeah. Well,
Okay,
a
so
lot of
where,
people-
That's where
what
my-
is,
my-
A lot of
Zone
people
four.
just assume it's Scott.
what is Liberty?
Liberty's Lee.
Then Kettle Run and Liberty can't be in the same magisterial district, I don't think.
What's the fifth one? Cedar?
I think Cedar Run, I think
Cedar
Kettle Run
Run.
is Cedar Run.
So we have
'Cause
Cedar
it's-
Run, Center District, Lee District, Scott
I
District,
had 'em
and
at-
Marshall District. And
I
can-
once
I'm
had
trying
'em
to
at.
remember that breakdown.
It's okay, we don't need to do that tonight, but I'll go take a look at that.
You're right, I think.
The Cedar Run.
It's Cedar Run is.
'Cause
is,
Lee's, I think,
Kettle Run is Cedar.
The other, yeah, the other
So
end of.
Cedar Run, I know, I'm Cedar Run and,
Yeah. Cause we're Cedar Run and then Scott's like across the street.
Liberty's Lee.
Lee, okay.
Yeah.
Because I think, I just wanna make sure that we have representation, I mean, that's,
it's Auburn, Scott, I believe.
yeah. See, I'm glad we have a Marshall, a Marshall person.
There aren't many
but-
of us that live up there,
But,
it's a
yeah,
great
the
area.
Liberty end of things needs some representation.
Population.
So I think I'll bring some, we'll get some brochures. Did we get brochures printed up? We talked about that, and then I don't know, we talked about getting some out to the schools about the
Yes,
SEAC.
we did get some stuff out of it, yes.
Great. Okay, so maybe we could get just a handful that we could get to the members here to get out. And if there are PTOs or, you know, families that we could talk to, I'm glad to help with that and, you know, recruit from this committee as well, because I want to get.
I would again recommend that you talk to Christina Yonke, because she has ambassadors at every school, and that would be probably,
I'm overdue for a meeting with her, so,
would be right up there.
great. All right. Okay, the I'm Determined program, if everybody's comfortable with doing that in November, we'll hopefully be able to find speakers. I do work with a self-advocate who has been very involved in the program, who's a young adult with cerebral palsy, and is an official I'm Determined ambassador. And then also, do we work with the TTAC at George Mason? I mean, do you have any direct contact with them?
Yes, I have email back and forth with them, they attend our weekly meetings.
Okay, because I think the I'm Determined, I mean, all the TTACs are supposedly have a representative, but JMU is kind of the headquarters, I think, for at least for that June conference. So I'll reach out and see what we can find, but at the very least, we'll be able to get information to parents about that in November. And then there was a lot of interest at our last meeting. We talked about the N2Y curriculum and basically what I'm doing now is just trying to recap what we were talking about at our last meeting into bundles that would fit into our agenda for the year. So maybe an update on N2Y that was rolled out to the high schools this year. Just kind of an overview and update on that, the status of implementing that. There was a question about accommodations for students with visual and other impairments. And then a more general discussion about technology instruction for students in program classrooms, like how, just making sure they're not, like left off the technology bandwagon. So what other kinds of, what does that look like? That was one of the questions, I think. So that, I'm thinking about that maybe like in January. And then we wanted an update on the Virginia Literacy Act ELA implementation, which by then hopefully we'll have more information. I think we were like out front and then had to kind of back off a little bit. So tier 1, what's going on with that, and then the range of literacy interventions in special education. And then other issues that we need to address that don't require like a full-blown presentation, but we'll get the budget report in March. Do you remember when the restraint and seclusion, what month that is?
I don't.
Okay, so just whenever that is, I just want to kind of have that on our radar. And then the inclusive practices plan development is out there. So just keeping it on the front burner.
It's on my board.
Okay, so that we'll just kind of do updates on that as we go along. If we do something really exciting, we can have a whole session on that. And then the March Disability Awareness Month. Are we at a point now, do you know who's gonna be running point on that? Okay. Maybe if you could try to find out for our next meeting. I just wanna make sure that we're at the table if there's a conversation happening. Are there any other issues that we've talked about or that you feel like were left off this list?
Last year we had talked about a lot of other SEACs do recognition programs for exemplary teachers, support staff, and administrators who are supporting our students with disabilities. I think that's something we should definitely talk about implementing in Fauquier to recognize the incredible things that a lot of our staff are doing in schools.
Are you thinking about something that would be general to all special education staff? Are you thinking about more inclusion focused?
So I can only speak to the way it has run in other counties that I've worked in. So there's a recommendation form that goes out to all campuses. It's blasted out to all parents, and it's just recognition awards for exemplary administrators in special education, exemplary teachers, and then exemplary support staff. So that could be in an inclusion-based program or in a specialized. It's just referral by.
I've seen both. So.
Yeah, it's referral by colleague or by parent, just to recognize. And then there's generally an award ceremony at the end of the year to recognize those staff members for their contributions.
Maybe this is something that we can talk about what's doable, and I think the school board has been very willing to do recognitions when we've got folks to recognize, so that might be nice on the heels of a Disability Awareness Month as well. So.
Yes, yeah, and I know at least most of the SEACs that in the surrounding counties all do the recognition
Would you
program.
be interested in helping take the lead on that?
Absolutely.
Outstanding.
I would recommend that you reach out to your school board. I'm not sure who's the school board assigned to the SEAC at this point. Do you know who that is?
It was Mrs. Pauling and Ms. Littereber, but I know we've got an election coming up. I don't know if that
You might
may
want
or
to
may
send
not.
them an email
Okay.
with that idea.
Okay. And I'll copy you on that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Any other issues? New business. That was really kind of it. If
Discussion, yeah.
member discussion, and if you all have things that are going on, Amanda, if you wouldn't mind taking a second to talk about what you're going to be doing during training. I think it's helpful to share what's going on in the county or elsewhere that people might be interested in.
On Monday.
Yeah.
So as a county, we have a PD day, and all schools are being tasked. We're all attending a training at Kettle Run High School, and Mr. Courtney may be able to speak better about their different sessions that we can choose to go throughout our day. And then we return.
Sorry, I've had a hard time hearing.
I was saying, I don't know if you wanted to share anything about that, what's going to be happening at Kettle Run, but there's different sessions that we're able to choose from during that. I think everybody's going the first half of the day to Kettle Run, and there's a wide variety menu of different options that we can. I think we will attend 3 sessions while we're there, and then we're returning to our schools, and our school has some PD available to us as well. At Auburn, ours is set up as 3 sessions that we will rotate through based on our departments so that's how our school's doing it, but I think each school has flexibility of what that schedule looks like for their staff. But the expectation is we are doing some school-wide PD once we return back to our building.
And you're doing some on inclusion at Auburn.
We are. One of our sessions is on an inclusion activity.
Great. Any other new business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Yes. Aye.
Wonderful. We will see you in November. That's what I need.
Makes it a little more official.
I knew there was something I needed. That's what I need.
We'll have it for November.
No,
It seems
please.
like we're in court.
I have enough.